Welcome to Family Revenge Secrets, where we tell the stories families whisper about and the truths that rise when love is tested. If you're new here, consider subscribing so you don't miss what comes next. Today's series is called The Secret Recipe. Maria kept the recipe card in a chipped blue tin that once held buttons and before that, wedding candy. The card itself was soft at the corners, stained by cinnamon dust and years of Sundays. If she held it to her nose, she could still catch a trace of her late husband's aftershave, how he used to kiss her cheek and say, "Save me a slice," as if the world might end before dessert. She was 58 now, a widow who ran a small bakery on the edge of a Midwestern town where the church bells still mattered and strangers still waved from pickup trucks. People came to Maria's hearth for coffee and comfort, for the friendly squeak of the door, for the quilts on the wall, for the glass case that fogged with every warm tray that slid inside. They came for Maria's smile, yes, but mostly for the pie, the apple cinnamon one with the woven crust that browned like autumn leaves, the pie that made grown men close their eyes after the first bite and made children behave as if they'd been promised a miracle. The pie was her inheritance. Not in dollars. Lord knew there had never been many of those, but in devotion. Maria's grandmother had whispered it to her mother in a kitchen that smelled of wood smoke. Her mother had whispered it to Maria in a kitchen that smelled of sunlight and soap. And now, Maria stood in her own kitchen, lit by winter's late afternoon, and faced her daughter. "Elena," she said, and the name was a prayer and a plea at once. Elena was 28 with her father's soft eyes and her mother's stubborn determination. She wore her dark hair tied back and an apron patterned with cherries, a gift from a 4th of July long past. Flower freckles dotted her forearms. She could bake anything if you wrote her a recipe, measured, exact, like a march across a field of numbers. But this wasn't that kind of lesson. "Close the door," Maria said. "Lock it." The old kitchen door shut with a small thud and the lock clicked, a sound that felt sacred. Outside, the late crowd was finishing their coffee. A boy tapped the glass with his mitten and grinned. An elderly couple shared a booth as if they were sharing an old memory. Inside, Maria lifted the blue tin and set it between them. "I'm going to give you something today," she said, "and you must know what it cost." Elena smiled nervously. "Mama, it's just a recipe." Maria shook her head. "No recipe that feeds a family is just anything." She opened the tin and pulled out the card. The handwriting, her mother's, wobbled like a line drawn in a car on a bumpy road. The ink had faded to a brownish purple. In the corner, someone, her grandmother, long before Maria was born, had doodled a tiny apple and 2 cinnamon sticks crossed like little swords. "Read it," Maria said. Elena read the list of ordinary things: apples, sugar, cinnamon, nutmeg, butter, flour, salt. Ordinary, yes, but in a way that Sunday church hymns were ordinary until they were sung. There were notes in the margins. "Slice the apples thinner when the weather's cold. It helps the spice travel. And don't fear the salt. Courage lives in a pinch." And a line written by Maria's husband in a different ink and a different lifetime: "Add laughter if the house is quiet." "How did you remember all this without the card?" Elena asked, tracing the faded words. "I didn't," Maria said. "I remembered by making it, 100 times, maybe 1,000. Memory bakes itself in." She stood at the counter, the one smoothed by time and elbows, and showed Elena what the card could never say. "You cut the apples like this," she said, slicing in even, patient arcs. "Not too thin or they disappear, not too thick or they stay hard after the oven. To judge the thickness, think about forgiveness, enough to be felt, not so much that it collapses." Elena laughed. "That's not a measurement." "It is," Maria said. "Not every measure is in cups." They worked together. Maria's hands moved with a rhythm that had outlasted grief. Even after her husband was buried and the house seemed to tilt under the weight of his absence, her hands had remembered these motions: the toss of apples with sugar, the sheen of lemon to wake them, the sprinkle of cinnamon like a prayer over a sleeping child. She showed Alina how to rub the butter into the flour with her fingertips until it looked like a field of little pebbles, how to drip in ice water until the dough just agreed with itself. She spoke of rest, how pastry needed it, how people did too. "See the way the dough holds when I press," Maria said. "That's faith. It doesn't crumble because it trusts you." They rolled the crust, they wove the lattice. Maria taught her daughter the old family trick: brush the top with a whisper of milk and a sigh of sugar, then pinch the edge as if you're sealing an envelope to someone you love. "When your grandmother taught me, she said the same words I'm going to say now," Maria said, her voice turning quiet in the hum of the ovens. "We give this to the next in line when we believe she can carry more than ingredients." Alina's eyes softened. "I can carry it." "I know," Maria said, and for a flicker of a moment, she saw Alina at 7, standing on a stool, stealing apple slices and hiding them in her cheeks, chipmunk proud. She saw Alina at 16, slamming a door because the world had told her she was too much and not enough in the same breath. She saw Alina on her wedding day, trembling over the vow, then smiling so widely that Maria felt stitched back together. They slid the pie into the oven. Heat folded around them. Cinnamon rose, an old friend coming up the driveway. Maria cleaned the counter, a habit her husband used to tease her about. "You clean as if life weren't messy," he had said, and Maria had replied, "Life is messy, that's why I clean." "Mama," Alina said, "you're crying." Maria hadn't noticed the tears until they cooled at the corners of her mouth. She wiped them with the back of her wrist and laughed softly, a sound with a crack in it. "It's the onions," she joked, though there were none in the room. They sat at the small kitchen table while the oven did its work. Through the pass-through window, Maria could see the bakery's front room. A man stood, buttoned his coat, and left a folded bill under his mug. He always over-tipped. A teenage girl brushed crumbs into her palm and slid them into her pocket, a quiet gathering of sweetness to take into a hard evening. "The world is loud," Maria said. "This kitchen is small, but what we do here matters." "I believe you," Alina said. "I need more than belief." Alina leaned in. "What?" Maria reached for her daughter's hands. She was surprised to find they were cold. She covered them, palm to palm, a sheltering roof. She felt the bones of the girl she had raised, the pulse that once beat beneath her own heart. "Listen to me," Maria said, and the room seemed to sit up straight. "This recipe is our story. It fed your grandfather when work ran thin, and your father when the doctor's bills ran thick. It fed you when you were too sad to eat but would taste just one bite if I swore it was from the first slice. It has kept our lights on and our doors open and our little hopes alive." Alina nodded, eyes wet. "Never let this recipe leave our family." The words were a lock and a key, a blessing and a boundary. Alina closed her eyes as if receiving communion. "I promise," she said. The timer dinged. Maria rose and opened the oven. The pie had browned to the color of late September. The filling bubbled like small, contained joy. She set it on the rack to cool, and the room filled with that smell, the one that makes neighbors think of their own kitchens, their own mothers, their own empty chairs. "Let's give the first slice to the couple in the booth," Maria said. "He always holds her hand when I bring it. I like knowing that." Alina smiled. "Is that in the recipe, too?" Maria slipped the blue tin back into its place, deep on the shelf, behind the flour jar, and under the old radio that sometimes found baseball games through the static. "It is now," she said. Out front, the boy in the mittens pressed his face to the glass again and laughed at his own breath clouding the window. The bells on the bakery door chimed as someone left and someone else came in. Life kept swiveling. In back, mother and daughter stood shoulder to shoulder, their aprons dusted with the same white proof of work, their hearts warmed by the same old heat. "Ready?" Maria asked. "Ready," Alina said. They lifted the pie together, as families do, carrying something fragile between them, not yet knowing how heavy it would become. Maria's bakery always woke before the sun did. The ovens were already humming at 5 in the morning, warming the walls like a steady heartbeat. The street outside still yawned in shadows, but the scent of rising dough drifted into the town, summoning the first wave of regulars, the nurse finishing her night shift, the school janitor who tipped in quarters, the young mother balancing twins on her hips. Elena had grown used to this rhythm. She tied her apron, hair pulled back, smile half-tired but earnest. She moved with the energy of someone who believed in building something new, something larger than the small shop her mother had nurtured for decades. She wanted to modernize the logo, redo the windows, maybe even bring in investors. To her, the bakery was not just a kitchen with pies. It was a seed that could grow into a tree shading the whole town. Daniel, her husband, carried a tray of steaming bread to the front counter. He was 30, tall, and outwardly gentle. He had a salesman's charm, quick to compliment, quick to listen. Customers liked him, though some of the older ladies whispered that his smile seemed rehearsed. He often spoke of expansion, of franchising, of turning Maria's hearth into something that could travel beyond state lines. Elena loved his ambition, even when it pressed against the careful, small-town pace her mother clung to. At the center of it all was Maria. She moved slower these days, arthritis in her knuckles, a faint limp when she carried the heavier trays, but her eyes carried the kind of authority that made everyone stop fussing. She would tilt her chin and say, "Dough doesn't hurry for anyone, let it breathe." And both Elena and Daniel would quiet, reminded that this bakery, for all their dreams, belonged first to the woman who had shaped it with her bare hands. That afternoon, after the morning rush, Maria called them into the back. She had been kneading dough, her sleeves rolled high, flour streaked across her wrist like chalk lines. The old blue tin sat on the counter again, its lid closed but humming with presence. "Elena, Daniel," she began, "you both know what this place means. Not just to us, but to the people who come here. When they sit at our tables, they don't buy bread, they buy a moment of peace. They buy trust. And trust," she tapped the tin, "is built like crust, thin layers, pressed together, never rushed." Daniel leaned against the counter, arms folded. "Maria, I agree, but sometimes crust breaks if you stretch it too far. And don't you think maybe it's time to stretch?" Maria's eyes narrowed gently, not unkind but firm. "Stretch too far and it tears." Elena looked between them, her heart tugged both ways. She admired her mother's wisdom, but also carried Daniel's fire in her veins. She remembered the nights when she and Daniel stayed up drawing logos on napkins, imagining their bakery's name on bright signs across the highway. She wanted her mother to see that vision, to trust that growth could be as sacred as tradition. "Maybe," Elena said softly, "we can do both. Keep the soul here, but let others taste it too." Maria turned her gaze to her daughter. For a moment, she saw the 7-year-old Elena who once begged to sell lemonade on the sidewalk, convinced she could change the world one paper cup at a time. Maria smiled faintly. "Perhaps, but not at the cost of what makes us us." The clock chimed 4. Through the window, the school bus hissed to a stop, and a small figure leapt down with a backpack too large for his shoulders. Their son, Lucas, 7 years old, burst into the bakery like a gust of spring air. "Grandma, Mom, Dad," he shouted, waving a crayon drawing. "I drew our bakery. See? Here's the pie, here's you, Grandma, and here's Mommy and Daddy holding hands." Maria crouched, aching knees forgotten, and admired the scribbles. The pie was oversized, glowing like a sun. She touched Lucas's cheek and whispered, "You're the reason we keep baking." Daniel scooped the boy up, smiling. "And one day you'll run the biggest bakery in the country, won't you, champ?" Lucas nodded, his eyes bright. He didn't know yet what legacy meant. To him, the world was simple. His grandmother's pies, his mother's laughter, his father's stories of big dreams. That evening, after the shop closed, they gathered for dinner in the kitchen. Maria cooked slowly, refusing shortcuts. The table was set with mismatched plates, a vase of wildflowers Lucas had picked from the roadside. Conversation danced easily. Alina talked about updating the menu, Daniel about contacting a food magazine, Maria about the importance of letting dough rise overnight instead of rushing it. When the meal ended, Maria stood and placed the last slice of pie at the center of the table. The crust gleamed under the light, sugar crystals catching like tiny stars. "This," she said, "isn't just food. It's our name, our blood, our hope. And one day, when I'm not here, it will be yours, Alina. Yours to guard, yours to grow. But remember," her voice lowered, carrying the weight of every generation behind it, "never let this recipe leave our family." Alina placed her hand over her mother's, her eyes steady. "I won't, Mama, I promise." Daniel smiled, raising his glass of water as if it were wine. "To family. And to a future where everyone can taste what makes this family special." Maria lifted her gaze, hearing the words but tasting the hidden edge in them. The promise felt both strong and fragile, like crust before the oven's fire. The pie cooled on the table between them, sweet and silent, as if listening. The first hints of success arrived not with trumpets, but with murmurs, whispers carried in the town's diner, murmurs passed between mothers on school benches. People said Maria's hearth had something different, something no other bakery offered. The pie was the same on paper, apples, sugar, cinnamon, but in the mouths of the townsfolk it became something else entirely. Comfort in a forkful, memory in a crust. By spring, customers weren't just from the neighborhood anymore. Cars from neighboring towns lined the street. Strangers who had only seen a photograph of the pie in a local blog drove 2 hours to taste it. One man even claimed he had dreamed of it after hearing about it from a friend. "A pie you dream about," he said, laughing. "That's worth the gas money." Maria watched it all with the quiet satisfaction of someone who knew the worth of her craft but never boasted. She stood at the counter, her apron dusted with flour, nodding at the crowd as though she had expected them all along. Still, in her chest, a secret pride bloomed. Her family's recipe had survived another generation, another test. Alina, on the other hand, saw more than pride. She saw possibility. She lingered near the tables, listening to customers rave. "You should be in every grocery store," one woman said. "Why isn't this on TV?" another asked. Alina wrote down suggestions in a notebook she carried in her apron pocket. Packaging ideas, online delivery, maybe even a new logo with brighter colors. The pie was no longer just a family treasure. It could be a brand, a story the world would pay for. Daniel noticed too, though his smile was different. Where Alina's eyes shone with excitement, Daniel's gleamed with calculation. He imagined franchises in every state, gleaming stores with modern glass walls, not a quaint kitchen with mismatched plates. When customers praised the unique taste, he filed the words away, already imagining investors nodding at the promise of profit. He loved his wife, yes. He respected Maria, perhaps, but deep inside, he loved the gleam of ambition most. One Thursday afternoon, a stranger walked into the bakery. He wore a tailored suit, incongruous against the wooden floors and chalkboard menus. His shoes shone too brightly for a town where dust clung to everything. He ordered a slice of pie, ate it slowly, and then leaned across the counter where Maria was pouring coffee. "Mrs. Alvarez," he said, "this is remarkable. My name is Charles Bennett. I represent a food distribution company in Chicago. We take small-town specialties like yours and bring them to a larger stage. Imagine your pie in supermarkets, your name in every household. We'd pay generously for the recipe." Maria set the coffee pot down with a firmness that startled him. She wiped her hands on her apron and looked him in the eye. "This pie is not for sale, sir. It belongs to my family, not your shelves." Bennett chuckled, unfazed. "Everyone has a price. Think it over." He slid a business card across the counter, its gold lettering shining under the lights. Call me when you're ready. Maria didn't touch the card. She simply turned back to her ovens. The man left with a polite nod, but not before Daniel intercepted the card and slipped it into his pocket. That evening, over dinner, Maria mentioned the encounter. A man came today, offered money for the recipe. I told him no. Of course you did, Elena said, laughing nervously. It's our recipe, we'd never. Never, Maria agreed. Daniel cleared his throat. But what if he wasn't wrong? Think about it. One recipe, just one, and we could pay off the mortgage, save for Lucas's college, maybe even open that second location you've dreamed about. His voice was calm, persuasive, like water-smoothing stone. Maria's gaze hardened. A recipe isn't a lottery ticket. It's a trust. It carries our history, our sacrifice. You don't gamble with that. Elena reached for her husband's hand. She's right, Daniel. This isn't just business, it's Mama's life. Daniel nodded slowly, but his jaw tightened. I understand, he said, though his tone suggested otherwise. The conversation ended, but a seed had been planted, one that grew not in Maria's heart nor Elena's, but in Daniel's. He lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, hearing again the words, "We'd pay generously." He thought of the shine in Bennett's suit, the gold letters on the card, the way opportunity had sat right there on the counter, only to be brushed aside like crumbs. Days passed and the whispers grew louder. A food blogger posted a rave review. The best apple pie in America might be hiding in a small town you've never heard of. Orders doubled. The line stretched out the door on weekends. Maria smiled, proud yet protective. Elena buzzed with ideas, sketching layouts for a website. And Daniel, standing behind the counter, slid the business card out of his wallet again and again, reading the embossed name as if it were scripture. One evening, when Maria closed the bakery and the family sat down to rest, Elena laid her notebook on the table. I think we should consider expanding, she said. Not selling the recipe, but sharing the product. Maybe a food truck or catering. Maria sighed. Expansion is hunger disguised as progress. We're not starving. We have enough. Enough for now, Daniel muttered under his breath, but Maria heard him. She watched his eyes, too restless, too eager. She said nothing, but her chest tightened. A mother knows when the air in her house has shifted, when ambition begins to sound like temptation. The ovens cooled, their warmth fading into the night. Outside, the town was quiet, but inside the bakery's walls, the first cracks of division had begun to spread, hairline fractures invisible to the naked eye, yet destined to widen. And somewhere in Daniel's wallet, that gold-lettered card waited, patient as sin. It began with a ping on Elena's phone. She was wiping tables in the front of the bakery when the screen lit up with a message from a friend. "Isn't this your mom's pie?" Attached was a link to a TikTok video. Elena frowned, slid her finger across the glass, and waited for the video to load. There it was, the golden lattice crust, the sugared edge, the bubbling apple cinnamon center. The camera panned across the pie as if it were a treasure chest opening to reveal gold. A cheerful influencer in a spotless kitchen leaned into the frame. "Guys, I just learned the best apple pie recipe. Totally secret, and you won't believe how easy it is." She winked and began rattling off the ingredients, step by step, exactly as Maria had whispered them in the back kitchen only weeks earlier. Even the handwritten notes, the pinch of courage and the salt, were repeated word for word. Elena's stomach dropped. Her hands trembled, and the rag slipped to the floor. "Mama," she called, her voice sharp with panic, "you need to see this." Maria emerged from the kitchen, wiping flour from her arms. She peered over her daughter's shoulder, squinting at the tiny screen. For a long moment, she said nothing. The video kept looping, the influencer's chirpy voice repeating the sacred words as if they were nothing more than a party trick. Maria's face went pale. "No," she whispered. "No, no, no." Within an hour, the video had been shared across town. Teenagers streamed into the bakery, laughing. "We can just make it at home now," one said, snapping a selfie in front of the counter. Maria stood frozen behind the register, feeling the air thicken around her chest. The next day, it wasn't just whispers. It was lines outside the supermarket. A national brand had rushed a product onto shelves, boxed pies with glossy labels, cinnamon heritage apple pie, a taste of tradition. The packaging showed a smiling grandmother in a blue apron. Maria stared at the photo in disbelief. It wasn't her picture, but the apron looked like hers. The marketing copy read, "Passed down through generations, now available for your family." By the week's end, sales at Maria's hearth had collapsed. Regulars stopped coming, or if they did, they only stayed for coffee. One man sheepishly admitted, "I can buy the pie for half the price at the store." Another added, "It tastes the same, Maria. I'm sorry." Maria listened in silence, her heart breaking with every word. At night, she sat at the kitchen table, the blue tin before her, its lid still closed, as if ashamed. Elena tried to reassure her. "Maybe it's a coincidence. Maybe someone guessed the recipe, or maybe," her voice faltered, "maybe I let something slip without knowing." Maria shook her head. "No, Elena, this isn't guesswork. Those words, those little notes, no one outside this family could have known them." She reached across the table, gripping her daughter's hands. "You didn't betray me, I know that." Elena's eyes filled with tears. "Then who did?" From the corner of the room, Daniel cleared his throat. He had been quiet, sitting with his laptop open, watching the storm unfold on social media. "Maybe," he said carefully, "we should see this differently. If the recipe is out there, why not ride the wave? Partner with a distributor, maybe even license it ourselves. We could turn this disaster into opportunity." Maria's head snapped up. "Opportunity?" Her voice was sharp enough to cut glass. "Our family's soul is being sold in a box, and you call it opportunity?" Daniel raised his hands defensively. "I'm just saying, if the horse has left the barn, maybe we stop chasing and start selling tickets to the show." Elena glared at him. "This isn't just business, Daniel. This is my mother's life." The room went heavy with silence. Lucas stirred upstairs, muttering in his sleep. Maria stared at Daniel long enough for him to drop his gaze. Still, his words lingered like smoke. By Sunday, the town was buzzing. The bakery, once alive with laughter, now sat nearly empty. Maria wiped the counter for the 10th time, her body moving but her spirit hollow. Each squeak of the rag felt like erasing part of her past. She thought of her grandmother, of her mother, of her late husband. She thought of how carefully she had guarded this recipe, only to see it stolen and paraded for likes and profit. That evening, Maria stepped outside alone. The street lamps glowed orange. The air smelled faintly of fried food from the diner down the block. She looked across the street at the supermarket, where stacks of glossy pie boxes towered in the display window. Customers streamed out with bags in hand, smiling, as if they had discovered something new. Her throat tightened. She whispered into the night, as if to her husband, "I failed them." Behind her, Elena appeared, wrapping a shawl around her mother's shoulders. "You didn't fail, Mama. Someone betrayed us." Her voice trembled with anger. "And we'll find out who." Maria closed her eyes, leaning into her daughter's warmth. She wanted to believe, but in her heart a dread had taken root, the kind only a mother could feel. She remembered Daniel's restless eyes, the way he had pocketed that card from the man in the suit, the way his words always leaned toward money. She pushed the thought away, unwilling to speak it yet. But the silence between them carried its own confession. "Never let this recipe leave our family." Her own words echoed back at her, bitter as ash. Inside, the ovens cooled. The bakery sat in darkness. And somewhere, on a glowing screen and on supermarket shelves, their family's secret lived without them, cheapened, stolen, yet unstoppable. Maria pressed her hand against her chest and whispered a promise no one else could hear. "I will find the truth, even if it shatters us." The bakery smelled different now, not of warmth and cinnamon, but of fear. Customers trickled in, a fraction of what they once were, their footsteps hesitant as if the place carried a secret shame. Maria moved behind the counter with slow precision, forcing herself to smile, though each grin felt like a crack in old porcelain. She told herself over and over, only 3 people knew the recipe herself. Elena, Daniel, the thought looped like a stubborn hymn. One morning, Maria stood by the ovens, arms folded, staring at a tray of rolls that hadn't risen properly. Elena was in the front, refilling coffee for the 2 loyal regulars who still came every day out of habit or pity. Daniel busied himself near the register, tapping on his phone with an eagerness that felt out of place in their hollow shop. Maria studied him carefully. He laughed at a message, slipped the phone back into his pocket, and whistled softly. His whistling was off-key. Maria's chest tightened. Is this what guilt looks like, or am I only desperate for a villain? That evening, when the bakery closed, Maria gathered her daughter and son-in-law in the kitchen. The air was heavy with fatigue. The old clock on the wall ticked too loudly. Sit, Maria said. She placed the blue tin in the center of the table, like evidence in a courtroom. Elena glanced at her mother nervously. Mama, what's this? You both know what it is, and you both know what's happened. Maria's voice was calm but carried the edge of a blade. A recipe is out in the world. Someone let it escape. Elena's eyes widened with hurt. Mama, you don't think. I think, Maria interrupted, that secrets do not grow legs and walk away, they are carried. Daniel leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. So what are you saying, Maria? That one of us sold it. His voice was calm, but his jaw twitched. I am saying, Maria replied, that there are only 3 who could have. Silence, the clock ticked. Elena's cheeks flushed. I swear to you, Mama, I never told anyone, not even my closest friends, I wouldn't. Maria reached across the table and held her daughter's hand. I believe you, Mija. Daniel exhaled sharply, breaking the moment. Well, that leaves me, doesn't it? Is that what you're hinting at? That I'd betray my own family? Maria's eyes fixed on him. Would you? His stare met hers. For a second too long, he didn't answer. Then he laughed, a short, hollow sound. You've got to be kidding. I've worked day and night in this place. I've cleaned ovens, fixed chairs, charmed customers. Why would I risk it all? Why does anyone? Maria said softly. Money, ambition, promises of more. Elena shook her head, torn between them. Please stop. We can't tear each other apart. That's what they'd want, the ones who stole it. Maria didn't respond. She reached for the tin, her hands trembling, and pulled out the recipe card. She set it gently before them. This is not just paper. It is my mother's hands, my grandmother's prayers. It is the nights I worked 2 jobs so Elena could go to school, the mornings I woke before dawn to keep this bakery alive after your father died. This is not just food. This is us, and someone treated it like currency. Her voice broke on the last word. Elena pressed her hands to her face, tears spilling. Daniel stood suddenly, shoving the chair back. You're blaming me because you can't accept the truth, that maybe it just got out. Maybe someone else figured it out. Recipes aren't magic. Maria rose too, slowly, her age showing in the stiffness of her knees, but her eyes fierce as a storm. This one is. Daniel's face darkened. For a moment, Maria thought he might shout, but instead he grabbed his coat from the hook and walked out into the night without another word. The door slammed. The sound echoed through the empty bakery like a verdict. Elena sobbed quietly at the table. Maria stroked her daughter's hair, though her own hands shook. Her heart was torn open. She had no proof, only the nagging certainty that Daniel's restlessness, his hunger for more, had cracked their world apart. Later that night, Maria went to close the shop's back door. As she reached for the lock, something caught her eye, a folded piece of paper wedged in the crack of the storage cabinet. She pulled it out, a printout of an email. Her English wasn't perfect for every technical term, but she understood enough. It was an exchange about terms of partnership, about intellectual property, about initial payment received. Her breath hitched. She pressed the paper against her chest, her knees nearly giving way. There it was, not just suspicion, but proof, or at least the beginning of it. Maria stood in the darkened bakery, the ovens cold, the card heavy in her hand. She whispered into the silence, her voice breaking, "God help me, because if it's true, I must protect Alina from the man she loves." Maria sat at the kitchen table long after midnight, the bakery silent except for the ticking of the wall clock. The folded printout trembled in her hands. The words stared back like accusations: partnership terms, payment received, distribution rights. She didn't need to know every legal phrase. The meaning was clear enough. Daniel, she closed her eyes. A lifetime of trust pressed against her chest. She thought of the day Alina had married him, how Maria had kissed his cheek, whispered take care of her the way her father would have. How naive those words felt now, like giving a wolf the keys to the pen. Yet when the dawn came, Maria said nothing. She cooked breakfast for her daughter and grandson, poured coffee as though nothing had changed. Daniel came down last, his hair still damp from the shower, humming a tune under his breath. He kissed Alina's cheek, ruffled Lucas's hair, and smiled at Maria as if her suspicion were nothing but a shadow. Maria returned the smile, but it did not reach her eyes. That morning, after they all left, the boy to school, Alina to run errands, Daniel off on business, Maria pulled out an old leather-bound notebook. Its pages had once been filled with grocery lists, family budgets, reminders to pay bills. She turned to a blank sheet, dipped her pen, and wrote in a shaky hand. Tuesday, 10:47 p.m., found email printout in storage cabinet. Mentions partnership, intellectual property, payment. She paused, tapping the pen against her lip. Then she underlined the words twice. It felt both terrifying and relieving to see them on paper. No longer whispers in her mind, evidence. She wrote more. Wednesday, 7:15 a.m. Daniel leaves house after phone call. Spoke quickly, used the word shipment. Looked nervous when I entered the room. The ink bled into the page, heavy with her anger. That evening, she kept the notebook hidden in the drawer beneath the sugar bins. Each time she saw Daniel reach for flour or sugar, she felt her pulse spike, as though he might uncover her secret as easily as she had uncovered his. Days passed, each one thick with tension. Business continued to crumble. Customers drifted away. A teenager posted another video online showing how easy it was to make the viral pie. Views soared into the millions. Maria watched in silence, her heart breaking as strangers reduced her family's lifeline to content for amusement. Alina, meanwhile, tried to hold everything together. She posted cheerful updates on the bakery's social media, ran small promotions, even suggested offering cooking classes. "We'll remind people what makes us special," she said with hope in her eyes. Maria forced herself to nod, but inside she wondered if her daughter realized just how deep the betrayal ran. On Thursday night, Maria returned to the notebook. Thursday, 9:00 p.m., Daniel left again, said he was meeting a supplier, did not take bakery van, used his own car. Returned at 11:42 p.m., empty-handed. She wrote the numbers slowly, pressing the pen so hard the paper nearly tore. As she closed the notebook, a memory surfaced, her own mother years ago teaching her the recipe. She remembered the look in her mother's eyes, solemn, reverent. "Never let this recipe leave our family," she had said, as though warning of a curse. Maria had promised, the way Alina had promised her, and yet here she sat, the recipe already sold, the legacy crumbling. Late that night, Alina came into the kitchen. Her hair was messy, her face tired. She sat across from her mother. "I don't know what to do, Mama. Daniel says maybe we should just accept it. That fighting is useless, but I can't bear the thought of letting go." Maria's throat tightened. She wanted to scream the truth, that it was Daniel himself who had loosened the grip, who had handed their treasure to strangers. But she looked at her daughter's weary face and stopped herself. "Not yet." Instead, she said softly, Sometimes, Hija, truth is like yeast. It rises slowly, but it rises all the same. Elena frowned, confused, but nodded. She kissed her mother's hand and went to bed. Maria waited until she was alone again. Then she opened the notebook and wrote one more line, "Elena deserves to know." But when? Her hand trembled as she set the pen down. She slid the notebook beneath the tin that held the recipe, as if layering secrets upon secrets. She whispered into the empty room, "Forgive me, Lord, but I must wait for the right moment. I must be sure." The ovens behind her were cold, but Maria felt the burn of betrayal hotter than any fire. The scent of roasted chicken and garlic bread filled the small dining room, the kind of meal Maria had always used to gather her family after a long week. It should have been comforting. Instead, the air felt brittle, as if every word might snap into an argument. The table was set with mismatched plates, the same ones Maria had collected from thrift shops over the years. Candles flickered in little glass jars, their glow softer than the silence that lingered. Elena moved briskly between the kitchen and the table, trying to inject cheer into the evening. She placed the serving dishes down, her smile fixed, her voice too bright. "Lucas, remember to wash your hands before you sit." The boy scampered off toward the sink, humming the tune of a cartoon theme. His innocence was the only easy note in the room. Daniel sat already, scrolling on his phone, his thumb moving with practiced speed. He slipped the device into his pocket when Maria entered with the last dish, a small pie baked from the family recipe. The lattice crust glistened under the candlelight. It looked perfect, but Maria felt only dread as she set it down. She sat at the head of the table, hands folded, watching her family settle. She saw Elena lean against Daniel's shoulder, trying to draw comfort. She saw Daniel nod absently, his eyes darting once toward the pie as if it were an accusation. Dinner began quietly. Knives scraped against plates, spoons clinked into bowls. Lucas chattered about school, how his teacher had praised his drawing, how he had been picked first for dodgeball. Maria smiled at him, genuinely, though her heart was heavy. "Grandma," Lucas asked between bites of bread, "why don't we have as many people in the bakery anymore?" The question dropped like a stone in the room. Elena's fork froze midair. Daniel cleared his throat. Maria inhaled slowly, steadying her voice. "Because sometimes, Carino, people forget what's real when the world shows them something shiny. But we keep baking, that's what matters." Lucas nodded, satisfied with the answer, and returned to his meal. The adults, however, did not. Maria watched Daniel carefully as he cut into his chicken. His movements were sharp, hurried. He avoided her gaze, focused on his plate. Finally, she spoke, her tone casual but weighted. "Tell me, Daniel, if a family secret were to escape, something sacred, what would you do?" The fork clattered from his hand, striking the plate with a hollow ring. Lena looked up, startled. "Mama," she began, but Maria silenced her with a glance. Daniel forced a laugh, picking up his fork again. "I'd protect it, of course. What else could I do?" Maria leaned forward. "Protect it or profit from it?" The room went still. Even Lucas, sensing the change, paused with his bread halfway to his mouth. Daniel's jaw tightened. His eyes flicked to Elena, then back to Maria. "What are you implying?" he asked, his voice low. "I'm asking," Maria said evenly, "because trust is like dough. Once it tears, no amount of patching makes it whole again." Elena set her fork down. "Mama, please, not tonight." Her eyes shimmered with fear, as if she knew what hung between them but couldn't bear to name it. Maria did not relent. She could feel her notebook hidden in the drawer just behind her, the proof waiting. She could feel the weight of the generations pressing on her shoulders. She wanted to shout, to lay out the evidence right there between the candles and the chicken, but she stopped herself. She wasn't ready, not until Elena could bear it. Instead, she let the silence stretch. Finally, she forced a smile, brittle as glass. "It's just a question," she said. Daniel's lips curved into a smile that didn't touch his eyes. He raised his glass of water in a mock toast. To family secrets, then, may they always stay safe. Maria lifted her own glass but did not drink. She watched him sip, her stomach twisting. Dinner resumed, but the mood never recovered. Lucas picked at his food quietly. Elena forced small talk, asking about school events, about errands. Daniel answered, his tone light but his shoulders rigid. Maria ate little, her appetite gone. When the plates were cleared, Maria brought out the pie. She sliced it carefully, placing the first piece before Elena, then Lucas, then Daniel. As she set the last plate down, she caught Daniel's eyes. He looked at the slice as though it were poisoned. Maria sat again, folded her hands, and said softly, "This recipe is more than food. It is who we are, never forget that." Elena nodded, blinking back tears. Lucas stuffed his fork eagerly into the pie, oblivious. Daniel ate slowly, every bite heavy as though swallowing guilt. Later that night, when the table was cleared and the family retired, Maria remained behind. She opened the drawer, pulled out the notebook, and added a new line beneath her neat handwriting. Friday, 7:42 p.m. Asked Daniel about betrayal at dinner. Hands shook, fork dropped, response evasive, eyes unsteady. She underlined unsteady 3 times. Then she closed the book, tucked it back under the tin, and whispered into the empty room, "The truth is close. I can feel it." The candles had burned to stubs. Smoke curled into the shadows. Outside, the wind rattled the windows as if the night itself knew what was coming. The storm broke on a Wednesday evening. Clouds hung low, pressing against the town as if the sky itself were burdened with secrets. Maria had spent the afternoon in silence, her notebook open before her, the damning printout folded neatly inside. She had copied the words again and again until the ink smeared her fingers. Payment received, intellectual property, partnership. Each phrase burned like fire across the page. By nightfall, she knew she could not wait any longer. Daniel came home late, his tie loosened, his shoes damp from the drizzle. He smelled faintly of cologne, not flour. Elena had already gone upstairs to put Lucas to bed, her tired voice drifting through the walls as she read a storybook aloud. Maria waited at the kitchen table, the blue tin before her, her notebook stacked neatly beside it. A single lamp cast a circle of light across the wood, leaving the rest of the room in shadow. Daniel paused when he saw her. "You're still up." Maria gestured to the chair across from her. "Sit." He hesitated, then pulled the chair back. The scrape of its legs on the floor was louder than the thunder outside. Maria opened the notebook. She slid the folded paper across the table. "I found this in the cabinet." Daniel glanced down. For a heartbeat, his face was unreadable, then his jaw tightened. "You went through my things?" "I went through my bakery," Maria corrected. This was hidden where flour should be. Her voice was steady, but her hands trembled against the table. "Tell me it isn't true." He leaned back, his smile practiced but thin. "It's just business, Maria, negotiations, nothing final." Maria slammed her palm against the table, the sound sharp as a crack of lightning. "Nothing final? Our recipe is already out there in boxes, in videos. Don't lie to me, you sold it." For the first time, Daniel's calm slipped. His eyes darted to the stairwell where Elena's voice still floated faintly. Then he lowered his voice. "I did what was necessary. You think you're protecting the family, but you're strangling it. That recipe could give us more than this little shop. College for Lucas, a future. Real money, not pocket change from coffee and pie slices." Maria's chest tightened. "So you betrayed us, you betrayed her?" She pointed toward the stairs. "Your wife, who trusted you with her heart. My daughter, who carried our name. You sold the one thing we were bound to protect." Daniel's eyes hardened. "I didn't betray her. I saved her, saved all of us. You're too blind to see it." Maria's voice dropped to a whisper, more dangerous than a shout. "You didn't save anyone, you broke us." Footsteps creaked on the stairs. Elena appeared, her robe wrapped tight, her face pale. "What's going on?" Daniel straightened, but his mask faltered. Nothing, love, just business talk. Maria stood, her body shaking, her hand pressed against the blue tin. Tell her, Daniel, tell her what you did, or I will. Elena's eyes flicked between them. Did what? The silence was heavy. The clock ticked. Rain beat harder against the windows. Maria opened the notebook, flipped to the page, and read aloud, "Payment received, distribution rights." She looked up at her daughter, her voice breaking. "He sold it, Elena, the recipe, our bloodline, our soul." Elena staggered back, clutching the stair rail. "No, he wouldn't. Wouldn't I?" Daniel snapped, his voice rising. "Wake up, Elena. This is the real world. Dreams don't pay bills. Sentiment doesn't buy your son's future. I did what had to be done." Tears filled Elena's eyes. "You lied to me." "I lied to protect you," he shot back. "To give you something better than scraping by." Maria's heart ached at the sight of her daughter, broken between love and betrayal. She stepped forward, her voice fierce. "No, Daniel, you lied because greed is never satisfied. You wanted more than love, more than enough, and you took it from us." Elena sank into a chair, her hands covering her face. "How could you?" she whispered. Daniel looked at her, his expression softening for a moment, almost regretful. But then he hardened again, his voice cold. "Because I refused to waste my life in a kitchen bound by dead women's traditions." The words sliced through the room like a knife. Maria's hand tightened on the tin. "Those dead women built the life you eat from, the roof over your head, the family you swore to cherish, and you spit on them." Thunder rumbled overhead. The room shook with silence. At last, Maria spoke, her voice steady, her decision final. "You will not touch this recipe again. You will not touch my bakery. And if you ever try, I swear you'll regret it." Daniel's eyes narrowed. He stood, his chair screeching back. For a moment, it seemed he might argue further, but instead he turned on his heel and stormed out. The front door, slamming so hard the windows rattled. Elena sobbed into her hands. Maria went to her, pulling her into an embrace. The smell of flour and tears mixed between them. "Shh, Hija," Maria whispered, her own voice breaking. "The truth is out now. We will survive this together." Above them, Lucas stirred in his sleep, as if even he could feel the storm that had split his family open. Maria held her daughter tighter, her heart aching but resolute. The recipe was no longer just a family secret. It was a weapon, a wound, a vow, and she would guard it with everything left in her. The bakery felt colder in the days that followed Daniel's confession, though the ovens still burned each morning and the smell of cinnamon still floated through the air. Maria woke before dawn, as she always had, but her hands seemed slower, her heart heavier. Every sound echoed sharper. The squeak of the old door, the scrape of chairs on the floor, the hum of the refrigerator. Even silence had weight now. Elena drifted through those days like a ghost. She showed up at the bakery because routine carried her there, but her spirit was absent. Her eyes were rimmed red from sleepless nights, her smile faint and forced. She could not bear to speak Daniel's name. When customers asked about him, "Where's that charming husband of yours? He always remembered my order." She would flinch, mutter something about business trips, and hurry away. Lucas felt it too, though he was only 7. Children sense fractures better than adults admit. He stopped humming as he played in the corner of the shop. He stopped asking his father to toss him into the air after school. One night, he whispered to Maria, "Grandma, why doesn't Daddy eat dinner with us anymore?" Maria kissed the crown of his head and lied gently, "He's busy, cariño." But she knew the boy didn't believe her. Daniel's absences grew. He left in the mornings with his phone glued to his ear, returned late with excuses that grew thinner each time. "Meetings," he said, "suppliers." His suit smelled of cologne, not flour. His shoes carried no dust from the bakery floors. He avoided Maria's eyes completely, as though her gaze might strip him bare. One evening, after closing, Maria found Elena alone in the kitchen. Her daughter sat at the table, shoulders slumped, staring at the blue tin as if it were both salvation and curse. Maria placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. Hija, she said softly. Elena looked up, her eyes brimming. I don't know what to do, Mama. Maria sat beside her. You do, you just don't want to admit it yet. Elena's lips trembled. I promise to stand by him, for better or worse. Isn't that what marriage is? Maria's throat tightened. She remembered her own vows, decades earlier, standing beside a man who had kept his promises until the day death took him. Marriage is not a license for betrayal, she said firmly. It is not meant to destroy the very family it swore to protect. Elena broke then. She wept into her mother's arms, her sobs muffled against the apron that had carried generations of flour. Maria held her, rocking her gently as if she were still the little girl who scraped her knees on the cobblestones. You're stronger than this, Elena, Maria whispered. You will not let his greed define your life. The following night brought the final crack. Daniel returned later than ever, his tie loosened, his eyes sharp. Maria and Elena were waiting. Lucas had been put to bed early, spared from the storm about to erupt. We need to talk, Elena said, her voice hoarse but steady. Daniel dropped his keys onto the counter with a clatter. I'm too tired for another lecture. This isn't a lecture, Maria cut in. It's an ending. Daniel's eyes flicked to her, then to Elena. What's that supposed to mean? Elena swallowed hard, her hands trembling. I can't live like this, Daniel, not with lies, not with you selling out the only thing that kept this family alive. I'm done. His laugh was bitter, a hollow echo in the room. You think you can run this place without me, without money, without connections, you'll be ruined. We're already ruined, Maria snapped, but we can rebuild without you. For a moment, rage flared in his eyes. He stepped closer, his voice a hiss. You'll regret this. Elena straightened, tears streaming but her chin high. No, I regret trusting you. Silence fell, thick and unmovable. Then Daniel grabbed his coat, shoved the door open, and vanished into the night. The slam rattled the windows. This time he did not return. Elena collapsed into a chair, sobbing openly. Maria moved to her side, kneeling though her knees ached. She took her daughter's hands and whispered, It is over. Let it be over. The next morning, Daniel's absence was no longer temporary. His clothes were gone from the closet. His toothbrush was missing from the bathroom sink. He left no note, only emptiness. Elena walked through the house like someone displaced, touching each thing as though asking it for reassurance. The framed wedding photo on the mantel, Lucas's crayon drawings taped to the fridge, the pie dish on the counter. She whispered apologies to her son when he asked, Is Daddy coming back? Maria answered for her, steady and firm, No, Carino, but you still have us. And that night, when the bakery closed and the last crumbs were swept away, Maria opened her notebook again. She wrote with heavy strokes. Saturday 11:03 p.m. Daniel gone. Marriage broken, Elena heartbroken. Lucas confused, family fractured but standing. She set the pen down and pressed her hand against the page. Tears blurred the ink, but she let them fall. In the silence, Maria whispered, We will endure, we must. The ovens cooled, the town slept, and inside one small kitchen, a mother held the pieces of her family like shards of glass, determined not to let them cut her daughter further. The recipe was still theirs, but it had cost them everything. The days after Daniel's departure felt like winter, even though spring sunlight poured through the bakery windows. The air had grown thin, brittle, heavy with what had been broken. Customers still passed by, some slowing at the sight of Maria inside, but few came in. The once bustling shop sat quiet, chairs pushed neatly under tables that longed for conversation. Maria refused to let silence win. Each morning, she lit the ovens, kneaded dough, and set pies to bake, though many would go unsold. She did it as ritual, as prayer, as defiance. Elena moved beside her, quieter than before, her laughter gone but her hands steady. They worked side by side, two women carrying the weight of many. One evening, after the ovens cooled and the last pie sat untouched on the counter, Elena sank into a chair. She stared at the pie, her eyes tired but thoughtful. Maybe, Mama, maybe we shouldn't keep this recipe locked away anymore. Maybe that's why it hurts so much, because it's heavy when we carry it alone. Maria looked at her daughter for a long time. Her instinct was to protect, to guard, to clutch tighter than ever. But then she saw the truth in Alina's face. The recipe had always been meant to nourish, not imprison. What good was a secret if it destroyed the very people it was meant to save? The next morning, Maria made a decision. She took chalk to the sandwich board that sat outside the bakery door. In looping script, she wrote, "Free pie workshop tonight at 6. Come learn our family recipe. Everyone welcome." Alina gasped when she saw it. "Mama, are you sure?" Maria smiled softly. "If others want to sell our soul for money, then let us give it freely for love." That evening, people came. At first, just a handful, the elderly neighbor who had lost her husband last year, a single father with his daughter, a curious teenager with flour on her jeans from baking at home. But as the minutes passed, more arrived. Word had spread quickly, as it always does in small towns. Soon the kitchen was full, the air thick with laughter, nervous chatter, and the warm scent of apples. Maria stood at the counter, her apron dusted white, her voice steady. "This recipe has lived in my family for generations," she began. "It has fed us in hunger, healed us in sorrow, and marked every celebration we've known. Tonight, it becomes yours too." Gasps filled the room. People exchanged looks of surprise, then of gratitude. Alina held the recipe card high for all to see, her voice trembling with both grief and pride as she read the ingredients aloud. They worked together, peeling apples, mixing sugar and spice, kneading dough. Children giggled as flour puffed into the air like snow. Maria walked among them, correcting a hand here, guiding a cut there. She told stories as she taught, how her grandmother would hum old songs as she sliced apples, how her mother said cinnamon was God's perfume, how her late husband once burned a crust but ate every crumb because love was stronger than mistakes. As the pies baked, the kitchen swelled with warmth. People leaned close, listening, learning. When the timer chimed, Maria pulled the pies from the oven. Golden, bubbling, fragrant, each one perfect in its imperfection. She cut slices, passing them around. The first bite brought silence, then sighs, then applause. A neighbor wiped tears from her eyes. "Maria, this is more than pie. It's hope." For the first time in weeks, Maria's chest loosened. She felt her grandmother's hands on her shoulders, her mother's voice in her ear, her husband's laughter in the room. The recipe was no longer just hers to guard, it was theirs to share. By night's end, every participant left with a handwritten copy of the recipe. Maria watched them walk out into the cool air, each carrying not just words on paper, but a piece of her family's heart. When the last guest departed, Alina hugged her tightly. "Mama, you turned our loss into something beautiful. You gave it back to the people." Maria kissed her daughter's hair. "That's what recipes are meant for, not to be hoarded but to be lived." Later, as they wiped the counters clean, Lucas wandered downstairs in his pajamas, rubbing his eyes. He sniffed the air and smiled. "It smells like when Daddy was still here, but better." Maria lifted him into her arms, pressing her cheek to his hair. "It smells like family, cariño, and that will never leave you." For the first time in months, laughter returned to the bakery. Not the laughter of commerce or ambition, but the simple joy of belonging. Maria knew their struggles weren't over. Daniel's betrayal still cast shadows. The brand in the supermarket still sold its cheap imitation. But something had shifted. The family was no longer hiding, no longer afraid. They had reclaimed the recipe by giving it away. And in doing so, Maria realized, they had reclaimed themselves. The months that followed were not easy, but they were different. The bakery no longer measured success by the number of pies sold, but by the voices that filled its kitchen. Every week, neighbors and strangers gathered to bake together. Some came with children perched on their hips, others with weary hands that had known hard work all their lives, all left with the same warmth in their eyes, a piece of Maria's story stitched into their own. Elena, though scarred by betrayal, found a new rhythm. She poured herself into teaching alongside her mother, showing others how to press dough gently, how to weave lattice with patience, how to add cinnamon with reverence. In teaching, she began to heal. Her laughter, once lost, returned in fragments until it rang freely again. Lucas grew too, his drawings now taped across the bakery walls, apples, pies, and stick figure families that always showed three: himself, his mother, and his grandmother. As for Maria, she learned that legacy does not end when it is shared. It grows. She would sit at the counter after the classes ended, watching the light of the ovens dim. She thought of her husband, of the women before her, of all the sacrifices buried in flour and sugar. They had entrusted her with more than a recipe, they had given her love stitched into every crust. And now, that love no longer lived in secrecy. It had spread like the scent of pies cooling on windowsills, drifting from home to home. One quiet Sunday afternoon, Maria closed the bakery early. She and Elena took Lucas to the park, where the boy ran across the grass, laughing. Maria sat on a bench, sunlight warming her face. She leaned against her daughter, whispering, "You see, Hija, we did not lose it. We gave it away, and in giving, it became stronger." Elena nodded, her hand wrapping around her mother's. "You were right all along. The recipe was never just food, it was us." Maria smiled, her heart full. She knew the pain of betrayal would never vanish completely, but she also knew it no longer defined them. Their family had been tested, broken, and remade. The scar was real, but so was the strength that came with it. That evening, Maria unlocked the bakery one last time, not for customers, but for something she had been preparing in secret. A camera sat propped on a stool, its red light blinking. Maria looked into the lens, her apron dusted in flour, Elena standing proudly beside her, Lucas leaning against her arm. With a steady voice, Maria began, "Thank you, friends, for walking this journey with us. This story of betrayal and healing is not just ours. It belongs to every family that has faced loss, every mother who has fought to protect her children, every home where love has been tested and endured. We share our recipe not only for pie, but for resilience, for forgiveness, for starting again." Elena smiled softly, placing a hand on her mother's shoulder. "We hope you'll carry it into your own kitchens, into your own families, and remember that what matters most is never lost when it's given with love." Maria's eyes glistened as she spoke the closing words. "From our family to yours, thank you for listening, for supporting, for believing. May your homes always be warm, your tables always full, and your hearts always protected. God bless you all with health, happiness, and the unshakable bond of family." The camera blinked, the ovens hummed, and somewhere in the distance, the world kept moving, carrying their story like the aroma of cinnamon drifting on the evening air. The legacy lived on. Thank you for staying with this story until the very end. Wishing you and your loved ones peace, joy, and the warmth of family.